Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through time, back to when America was young and wild, when open fields stretched endlessly and the air was filled with possibility. This is where our story begins, in the soft dust of summer afternoons, where a game would be born that would capture the heart of a nation. Before baseball had a name, before it had rules written down in careful script, there were games played in village greens and city lots. In England, children chased each other around posts in a game called rounders, swinging sticks at toss balls. When settlers crossed the Atlantic, they brought these memories with them, and the games evolved, changed, became something new under American skies. In Massachusetts, they called it town ball. In other places, base or go ball. The names were many, but the spirit was the same. The joy of running, catching, throwing beneath the sun. Then came the 1840s, and with them came order from chaos. In New York City, gentlemen were forming clubs, gathering after work to play their games. One club called themselves the Knickerbockers, named after the old Dutch settlers of Manhattan. And among them was a man named Alexander Joy Cartwright, a bank teller and volunteer firefighter with a gift for organization. In 1845, he sat down and did something that would echo through generations. He wrote down the rules. 20 rules that transformed a casual pastime into something elegant and enduring. Picture that moment, ink on paper, defining a diamond with bases set 90 feet apart. Cartwright couldn't have known that this distance was perfect, that it created the exact tension needed to make a close play at first base something that would thrill millions. He established that 3 strikes would retire a batter, that a ball caught in air was an out, that foul territory would stretch outward from home plate like wings. These weren't just rules. They were poetry written in geometry. On a June day in 1846, the 19th day of the month, something historic unfolded in a place called Elysian Fields, just across the Hudson River in Hoboken, New Jersey. The Knickerbockers took the field against a team called the New York Nine for the first game played under Cartwright's rules. The Knickerbockers lost badly that day, 23 runs to 1, but in their defeat, they had given birth to organized baseball. The score is forgotten by most, but the date remains, carved into history like initials in a tree. In those early years, baseball was played with a lightness, a gentleness we might barely recognize today. Players wore long pants, collared shirts, sometimes even straw hats. There were no gloves yet. Men caught the ball barehanded, their palms toughening with each practice. The ball was softer then, easier on the hands, and the pitcher stood just 45 feet away from the batter. But here's what's beautiful. The pitcher wasn't trying to strike the batter out. His job was to serve the ball so it could be hit, to start the play that would unfold across the diamond. The art was in the fielding, in the running, in the strategy that developed like a flower opening to morning light. Money hadn't touched the game yet. These men played for love, for exercise, for the pleasure of competition and companionship. They would gather on Saturday afternoons, play their games, and then retire for dinner and drinks, recounting the day's heroics and mishaps. Baseball was pure amateur, a gentleman's pursuit, but the nation was growing restless, pulling apart at its seams. When the Civil War came in 1861, it tore families and states asunder. Yet even in those dark days, baseball brought light. Soldiers in both Union and Confederate camps played the game to pass the endless hours between battles, to remind themselves of home and peace. They played in fields near Salisbury, North Carolina, and at prisoner of war camps. They taught the game to those who'd never seen it. And when the war finally ended in 1865, these men carried baseball with them like seeds scattered on the wind, planting it in every town and territory they returned to. By 1869, something had shifted. In Cincinnati, Ohio, a team called the Red Stockings made an announcement that shocked the baseball world. They would pay their players, all of them, salaries ranging from $600 to $1,400 for the season. Harry Wright, their manager and center fielder, assembled the finest players he could find from across the country. That year, the Red Stockings traveled by railroad from coast to coast, and they didn't lose a single game. 57 victories, 0 defeats, and suddenly everyone understood that baseball could be more than a pastime. It could be a profession, a spectacle, a business. The rules continued to evolve like a living thing. In 1887, batters lost the right to call for a high or low pitch. The pitcher could now aim for any part of the strike zone. The very next year, in 1888, the rule changed again. 3 strikes and you're out became absolute, with no more exceptions. Every adjustment was an experiment, a search for balance, for that perfect equilibrium between offense and defense. And then came 1893, and perhaps the most important change of all, the pitcher's mound, which had crept back from 45 feet to 50 feet to 55 feet, finally settled at 60 feet, 6 inches from home plate. Legend says this odd measurement came from a surveyor's mistake, misreading 60 feet, 0 inches as 60 feet, 6 inches. But whether by accident or design, it was perfect. At this distance, a fastball gave the batter just enough time to react, just enough, and the duel between pitcher and hitter became the heart of the game. As you rest now, breathing slowly, imagine those early diamonds scattered across America. Imagine the crack of wood on leather, the clouds of dust rising from sliding runners, the calls of safe and out, echoing across fields of twilight. Baseball was taking root, becoming something more than a game, becoming a ritual, a shared language, a thread connecting generation to generation in an unbroken line that stretches even to this very moment as you drift peacefully towards sleep. Segment 2, 10 to 20 minutes. Let your mind wander now into the new century, into the 1900s, when baseball was transforming from a scattered collection of teams and leagues into something grand and organized, something that would capture the imagination of an entire nation. In 1901, the American League declared itself a major league, standing equal to the older National League that had been founded in 1876. For a brief time, there was chaos. Teams stealing players from one another, rival leagues competing for fans and territory, uncertain about which league would survive. But by 1903, peace was made. The 2 leagues agreed to respect each other's contracts, to honor each other's territories, and most importantly, to meet at the end of each season in a championship series. They would call it the World Series, a name so grand, so confident. It suggested that baseball was not merely America's game, but the world's game, even though it was played almost entirely within the borders of a single nation. That first World Series in 1903 was a best-of-9 affair, played between the Boston Americans and the Pittsburgh Pirates. Boston won 5-3, and a tradition was born that would become as American as anything could be. The World Series would be played every year after that, with only one exception. In 1994, a labor dispute would cancel it, the only time in 90 years that autumn would arrive without a champion being crowned. The early 1900s gave us ballparks that would become cathedrals. In 1909, 2 stadiums opened that would stand for generations. Forbes Field in Pittsburgh and Shibe Park in Philadelphia were built of concrete and steel, permanent structures that announced baseball was here to stay. Then came 1912, a magical year for ballparks. On April 20th, Fenway Park opened in Boston with peculiar dimensions, its impossible green monster wall in left field standing 37 feet high. Just 5 days later, on April 25th, Tiger Stadium opened in Detroit, though they called it Navin Field then. And 2 weeks after that, on May 18th, a third temple rose, Crosley Field in Cincinnati. These weren't just places to play games. They were landmarks, gathering places where communities would come together season after season, where children would bring their own children, and those children would bring theirs. But the greatest of all the early ballparks wouldn't arrive until 1914. In Chicago on the north side, in a neighborhood called Wrigleyville, a stadium was built that they first called Weigman Park. It would change names, become Cubs Park, and finally, in 1927, take the name it still carries today, Wrigley Field. With its ivy-covered outfield walls and its hand-operated scoreboard, it would become timeless, a piece of 1914 preserved in amber, still welcoming fans more than a century later. During these years, the game itself was rough, low-scoring, dominated by pitching and defense. They called it the dead ball era, a time when home runs were rare as comets, when a single run might decide a game. The balls themselves were softer, used until they became dark and difficult to see. Pitchers were allowed to dock the ball, to scuff it, spit on it, darken it with tobacco juice or dirt. A pitcher named Eddie Sickott threw a pitch that danced and dipped so strangely they called it a shine ball, made by rubbing one side of the baseball until it gleamed. In this era, a tragedy occurred that would change the game forever. On August 16th, 1920, a player named Ray Chapman of the Cleveland Indians stepped to the plate at the Polo Grounds in New York. The afternoon was overcast, the light dim, and the pitcher, Carl Mays, threw a ball that rode in toward Chapman's head. Whether Chapman never saw it or froze, we'll never know, but the ball struck him in the temple. He collapsed at home plate and died the next morning, the only player in Major League history to be killed by a pitch ball. Baseball responded with new rules. Umpires would now keep clean, white balls in play, replacing any ball that became dirty or scuffed. The practice of doctoring baseballs was banned. The dead ball era was ending, and a new age was about to dawn. That new age had a name, and the name was Babe Ruth. Born George Herman Ruth in Baltimore in 1895, he began his career as a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, and a brilliant pitcher he was, winning 89 games in 6 seasons. But Ruth could hit like no one had ever seen, and in 1919, playing most in the outfield, he hit 29 home runs, more than any player had ever hit in a single season. It was a revolution in a single man. Then came the most infamous transaction in sports history. After the 1919 season, Red Sox owner Harry Frazee, in need of money, sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for $100,000 and a loan of $300,000 more. Boston fans would call it the curse of the Bambino, and their team wouldn't win another World Series for 86 years. But in New York, Ruth became something more than a player. He became mythology in pinstripes. In 1920, his first year with the Yankees, Ruth hit 54 home runs, nearly doubling his own record. The next year, he hit 59. Baseball was transformed overnight. Fans didn't want to see bunts and stolen bases anymore. They wanted to see the ball soar over the fences, wanted to see Ruth's mighty swing, wanted to witness the impossible made routine. Attendance exploded. The Yankees, once poor tenants in the Polo Grounds, grew so successful they built their own stadium in the Bronx, opening it in 1923. They called it Yankee Stadium, but everyone knew its real name, the house that Ruth built. Let yourself relax now. Sinking deeper, as you picture those old ballparks filling with crowds, the roar rising like a wave as Ruth steps to the plate, the crack of his bat, the ball climbing and climbing, disappearing into the distance. Baseball had found its first true superstar, and the game would never be the same again. Rest now, and let these stories carry you gently into the quiet of sleep. Segment 3, 20 to 30 minutes. Breathe slowly and drift with me now into the golden afternoon of the 1920s and 1930s, when baseball became woven into the fabric of American life like nothing before it. When heroes walked the earth and their deeds echoed through radio speakers in living rooms across the nation. Babe Ruth was just the beginning. The 1920s brought a flowering of talent that seemed almost impossible. In 1927, the New York Yankees assembled what many still consider the greatest team ever to take the field. They called them Murderers Row for the way their lineup destroyed opposing pitchers. Ruth hit 60 home runs that season, a record that would stand for 34 years, a number so large it seemed almost mythical. His teammate Lou Gehrig drove in 175 runs and hit 47 home runs himself. The Yankees won 110 games that season and swept the Pittsburgh Pirates in the World Series. They were unstoppable, inevitable like a force of nature. But Lou Gehrig would become famous for something even more remarkable than his hitting. On June 1st, 1925, Gehrig pinch hit for the Yankees, and the next day he entered the starting lineup at first base. And then he played the next day, and the next after that. For 14 years, through broken bones and illness, through slumps and injuries, through personal tragedy, Lou Gehrig played in every single game. The streak reached 1,000 games, then 1,500, then 2,000. On July 4th, 1939, when it finally ended, Gehrig had played in 2,130 consecutive games, a record of endurance and dedication that would stand for 56 years. They called him the Iron Horse, And when disease forced him to retire, he stood at Yankee Stadium on Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day and told a crowd that despite everything, he considered himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. His words would echo forever. The 1930s also gave us night baseball, a revolution that would transform the game. On May 24th, 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt pressed a button from the White House that turned on the lights at Crosley Field in Cincinnati. The Reds played the Philadelphia Phillies under artificial lights for the first time in Major League history, and suddenly baseball wasn't confined to daylight hours anymore. Working people could come after their shifts ended. Families could gather on warm summer evenings. Night baseball spread slowly at first. Many owners resisted. Traditionalists complained. But by the 1940s, most teams had installed lights, and the game had extended its reach into the darkness. These years also brought us radio, carrying baseball into every corner of America. Announcers became celebrities, their voices as familiar as family. They painted pictures with words, making listeners see what they could only hear. Baseball on the radio created a shared national experience. Millions of people scattered across vast distances, all listening to the same game, the same moment, connected by invisible waves carrying the crack of the bat and the roar of the crowd. In 1936, baseball enshrined its first immortals. The Baseball Hall of Fame opened in Cooperstown, New York, a small village where, according to legend, though untrue, Abner Doubleday had invented baseball in 1839. The Hall of Fame inducted its first class of 5 members. Ty Cobb, the fierce competitor who retired with a batting average of .366, the highest ever. Babe Ruth, of course. Honus Wagner, the great shortstop of the early century. Christy Mathewson, the gentleman pitcher who won 373 games. And Walter Johnson, whose fastball was said to be the fastest anyone had ever seen. These 5 would be joined by endless others for the decades, creating a pantheon of heroes preserved in bronze and memory. The 1930s and early 1940s belonged to Joe DiMaggio, the graceful center fielder for the Yankees who played the game with elegance that took your breath away. In 1941, DiMaggio did something that still seems impossible. Starting on May 15th, he got at least 1 hit in every game he played. 1 game became 5, became 10, became 20. The whole nation watched as the streak grew. 30 games, 40, 50. Pitchers tried everything to stop him, but game after game, DiMaggio found a way to hit safely. On July 16th, when the streak finally ended, it had reached 56 consecutive games, a record that stands today, more than 80 years later, untouched and perhaps untouchable. But even as DiMaggio was creating magic on the field, something was terribly wrong with baseball, a wound at its heart that everyone could see but few would acknowledge. Baseball was segregated. Black players, no matter how talented, were banned from the major leagues by an unwritten but strictly enforced rule. They played in their own leagues, the Negro Leagues, on barnstorming tours, and in stadiums that major league teams used only when their own teams were away. Players like Josh Gibson, who hit home runs that traveled distances Ruth never reached, and Satchel Paige, whose pitching was legendary, played in relative obscurity, their greatness witnessed by smaller crowds, their achievements less documented, their rightful place in baseball history denied by prejudice and fear. The Negro Leagues had begun in 1920 when Rube Foster founded the Negro National League, creating structure and stability for black baseball. Teams like the Kansas City Monarchs, the Homestead Grays, and the Pittsburgh Crawfords became institutions in their communities, sources of pride and entertainment. The quality of play was extraordinary, fast, daring, innovative. Players in the Negro Leagues were often more athletic, more creative, playing a style that emphasized speed and cunning as much as power. But they deserved to play in the major leagues, deserved recognition and fair compensation, deserved everything that was being denied to them. As you settle deeper into rest now, picture those parallel worlds, the major leagues playing in grand stadiums under bright lights, and the Negro Leagues playing wherever they could, often with inferior equipment and facilities, yet producing baseball just as beautiful, sometimes more so. Both worlds would soon collide, and when they did, baseball in America will be forever changed. Let these images blur now as sleep approaches, the boundaries between past and present dissolving like morning mist. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 4, 30 to 40 minutes. Let your breathing slow now, gentle and easy, as we arrive at one of the most important chapters in not just baseball history, but American history itself. The year is 1947, and the world is about to change. Branch Rickey was a general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, a man of principle and cunning in equal measure. He knew that segregation was wrong, that the color barrier in baseball was an injustice that shamed the game he loved. But he also knew that breaking would require more than good intentions. It would require the perfect man. Someone with not only extraordinary talent, but extraordinary character. Someone who could withstand the hatred and pressure that would surely come. He found that man in Jack Roosevelt Robinson. Jackie Robinson had been a star athlete at UCLA, excelling in 4 sports: baseball, football, basketball, and track. He had served as a lieutenant in the Army during World War II, where he had been court-martialed for refusing to move to the back of a military bus, charges that were eventually dismissed. Robinson had been playing for the Kansas City Monarchs in the Negro Leagues when Rickey approached him with an offer that would change everything. On April 15, 1947, Jackie Robinson took the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field, becoming the first black player in the modern major leagues. The significance of that moment cannot be overstated. Robinson faced death threats, vicious taunts from opposing players and fans, pitchers who threw his head, base runners who spiked him with their cleats. Some of his own teammates had initially signed a petition saying they wouldn't play with him. Hotels refused him rooms. Restaurants wouldn't serve him. The abuse was relentless, cruel, designed to break him. But Jackie Robinson didn't break. He had promised Branch Rickey he would turn the other cheek for the first 2 years, that he wouldn't respond to the provocations, no matter how severe. And he kept that promise. He responded the only way that mattered, by playing brilliantly. In his first season, Robinson batted .297, scored 125 runs, led the league in stolen bases with 29, and was named Rookie of the Year. More importantly, he carried himself with such dignity, such grace under pressure, that he won over not just his teammates, but millions of fans who watched him play. The Dodgers became the most integrated team in baseball. In 1949, they brought up Roy Campanella, a catcher who would win 3 Most Valuable Player awards. In 1953, they added Jim Gilliam. By the mid-1950s, the Dodgers' success was built on the talents of black players who had been given a chance. Other teams slowly, too slowly, began to follow. The Cleveland Indians signed Larry Doby just months after Robinson's debut, making him the first black player in the American League. The Boston Red Sox, shamefully, would be the last team to integrate, not adding a black player until 1959, 12 years after Robinson broke the barrier. The late 1940s and 1950s gave us another dynasty in New York. The Yankees, led by manager Casey Stengel, won the World Series 5 consecutive years from 1949 to 1953, a feat that had never been accomplished before and never has been since. This era introduced us to Mickey Mantle, a switch hitter from Oklahoma with breathtaking speed and power from both sides of the plate. Mantle could hit towering home runs that seemed to defy physics, balls that traveled 500 feet or more. He won the Triple Crown in 1956, leading the league in batting average, home runs, and runs batted in. But even as the Yankees dominated, the most beloved team in baseball might have been the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Dodgers hadn't won a World Series in their long history. They'd been to the series several times, but always lost, often to their crosstown rivals, the Yankees. Brooklyn fans loved their team with a passion that bordered on obsession, affectionately calling them Dem Bums. Every October brought hope, and every October brought heartbreak. Until 1955. That year, the Dodgers finally broke through. They faced the Yankees once again in the World Series, and this time, behind the pitching of Johnny Padres and the hitting of Robinson, Campanella, and Duke Snider, the Dodgers won in 7 games. Brooklyn erupted in celebration like nothing the borough had ever seen. After all those years of waiting, of hoping, of crying, wait till next year. Next year had finally come, but joy in Brooklyn would be short-lived. After the 1957 season, Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley announced the unthinkable. The team was moving to Los Angeles. At the same time, the New York Giants announced they were moving to San Francisco. Two of baseball's most historic franchises were leaving New York for California, chasing larger stadiums and new markets. Brooklyn fans felt betrayed, abandoned. The loss of the Dodgers was mourned like a death in the family, a wound that would never fully heal. The moves west, though painful for New York, transformed baseball into a truly national game. Suddenly, there were major league teams on the Pacific Coast. The country was growing, changing, and baseball was spreading with it. Taking root in new soil, finding new fans under different skies. As you sink deeper now into sleep, let your mind wander through Ebbets Field one last time before the wrecking ball came. Hear the voices of Brooklyn fans, their accents thick and warm, cheering for their beloved Bums. See Jackie Robinson stealing home, a play he executed 19 times his career, his daring and grace making the impossible look routine. Feel the electricity of change in the air, the old world giving way to the new. Rest now, peacefully, as the story continues to unfold across the decades. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 5, 40 to 50 minutes. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into the 1960s, a decade of transformation and expansion, when baseball grew larger and the game itself began to change in ways both subtle and profound. The decade began with a moment of pure magic. In 1961, Roger Maris of the New York Yankees chased the ghost of Babe Ruth. Ruth's record of 60 home runs in a season had stood since 1927, 34 years of seeming invincibility. Maris, a quiet man from North Dakota who never sought the spotlight, found himself in its glaring center. The pressure was immense. Fans and writers questioned whether he was worthy of breaking Ruth's sacred record, especially since the season had been extended from 154 games to 162. Commissioner Ford Frick even declared that if the record wasn't broken in 154 games, it would carry an asterisk in the record books, a cruel distinction that diminished Maris's achievement before he'd even made it. But Maris kept hitting home runs. 50, then 55, then 59. On October 1st, 1961, the final day of the season, in his 163rd game, Maris hit his 61st home run off Boston pitcher Tracy Stallard. The record was his, asterisk or not, though that asterisk was later removed, justice arriving decades late. The pressure had turned Maris's hair white in patches. The chase had taken a physical toll, but he had done it, had accomplished what seemed impossible. The early 1960s also gave us a Sandy Koufax, perhaps the greatest left-handed pitcher who ever lived. Koufax had struggled for years with the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers, unable to control his blazing fastball. But something clicked in the early 1960s, and for 5 seasons, from 1962 to 1966, Koufax was virtually unhittable. He threw 4 no-hitters, including a perfect game in 1964. In 1965, he won 26 games, struck out 382 batters, and had an earned run average of just 2.04. He won the Cy Young Award 3 times and was named the World Series Most Valuable Player twice. But Koufax's career ended tragically early. Arthritis in his left elbow caused him such pain that he had to soak his arm in ice after every start. Doctors warned him that continuing to pitch could cause permanent damage. After the 1966 season, at age 30, at the height of his powers, Sandy Koufax retired. He walked away from the game rather than risk never being able to use his arm again, a decision that spoke to his wisdom even as it broke the hearts of baseball fans everywhere. The 1960s were also years of expansion. In 1961, the American League added 2 new teams, the Los Angeles Angels and the new Washington Senators, replacing the old Senators franchise that had moved to Minnesota to become the Twins. In 1962, the National League added the New York Mets and the Houston Colt .45s, who would later become the Astros. Baseball was spreading, growing, reaching into new markets and creating new traditions. The Mets, in particular, captured imaginations in ways no one expected. In their first season, 1962, they were spectacularly bad, losing 120 games, the most losses in modern baseball history. But New York fans, still mourning the loss of the Dodgers and Giants, embraced the lovable losers. Casey Stengel, the old Yankees manager, came out of retirement to manage them, and his humorous commentary on their ineptitude "Can't anybody here play this game?" became legendary. The Mets played in the old Polo Grounds, that ancient stadium where the Giants once played, creating a sense of connection to New York's baseball past. But the Mets story would have a miraculous turn. In 1969, just 7 years after losing 120 games, the Mets won the World Series. They were massive underdogs, picked to finish near the bottom of their division, but led by pitchers Tom Seaver and Jerry Koosman, they won 100 games in the regular season and then defeated the powerful Baltimore Orioles in the World Series. They called them the Miracle Mets, and their victory was one of the great Cinderella stories in sports history. The 1960s also saw the construction of a new generation of stadiums, but these were different from the classic ballparks of earlier decades. These new parks were often multipurpose facilities, designed to host both baseball and football, with artificial turf instead of grass and symmetrical dimensions that lacked the quirky charm of places like Fenway Park or Wrigley Field. The Houston Astrodome opened in 1965 as the first domed stadium, an air-conditioned wonder they called the eighth wonder of the world. It had a roof, artificial turf. AstroTurf, they named it, and was unlike anything baseball had ever seen. Other cookie-cutter stadiums followed. Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. These places were modern, efficient, and utterly without soul. Fans could no longer be rained out, but they also couldn't feel the sun on their faces or smell the grass. Baseball was becoming more corporate, more standardized, though the game on the field remained as beautiful and unpredictable as ever. As the decade drew to a close, baseball was poised on the edge of new changes. The pitcher's mound would be lowered after 1968, the year of the pitcher, when batting averages plummeted and Bob Gibson posted an earned run average of 1.12, so dominant that the game itself had to be adjusted to restore balance. The designated hitter was coming. Expansion was continuing, and free agency would soon transform how players and teams related to each other. But for now, let yourself rest in the warm glow of the 1960s, when the Mets shocked the world, when Koufax's fastball hummed past helpless batters, when Maris chased his ghost and caught it. Breathe slowly, deeply, and let these stories carry you gently toward the deep peace of sleep. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 6, 50 to 60 minutes. Settle in now, breathing softly, as we enter the 1970s, a decade of change and controversy, of records both glorious and bittersweet, when baseball's relationship with players would be transformed forever. The decade began with a rule change that would divide baseball purists for generations to come. In 1973, the American League adopted the designated hitter rule, allowing teams to use a player to bat in place of the pitcher without requiring that player to take the field defensively. The National League refused to adopt the rule, creating a split that continues to this day. Supporters argued it added offense and excitement to the game. Critics called it an abomination that fundamentally altered baseball's strategic beauty. The designated hitter meant that pitchers in the American League no longer needed a bat, no longer had to think about bunting or hitting in crucial situations, no longer faced a decision of whether to remove themselves from a game for a pinch hitter. But the most significant change in the 1970s had nothing to do with rules on the field. It was about the business of baseball itself. For decades, players have been bound to their teams by the reserve clause, a contract provision that gave teams perpetual rights to a player even after his contract expired. Players couldn't negotiate with other teams, couldn't choose where they played. They were, in essence, property. In 1975, two pitchers, Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, challenged the system by playing the season without signing contracts, then filing for free agency. An arbitrator named Peter Seitz ruled in their favor, declaring that the reserve clause only bound a player for 1 year after his contract expired. Not forever. The owners were furious, but the decision stood. Free agency had arrived, and baseball would never be the same. Players could now choose their teams, negotiate with multiple suitors, command salaries that reflected their true market value. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. The 1970s gave us Hank Aaron's pursuit of baseball's most hallowed record. Babe Ruth's 714 career home runs had stood since 1935, nearly 40 years of seeming permanence. Aaron, who had played for Milwaukee and then Atlanta Braves since 1954, had been steadily, quietly accumulating home runs for 2 decades. He wasn't flashy like Ruth, didn't hit towering blasts that capture headlines. Aaron was consistent, dignified, excellent year after year after year. As Aaron approached Ruth's record in 1973 and 1974, he faced ugly racism. He received thousands of letters, many filled with death threats and hateful slurs. Some people couldn't bear the thought of a black man breaking the record of the great Babe Ruth. But Aaron persevered with grace and determination. On April 8, 1974, in Atlanta, in his first at-bat of the home season, Aaron hit his 715 home run off Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher Al Downing. The ball sailed over the left center field fence, and Aaron had done it. He would finish his career with 755 home runs, a record that would stand for 33 years. The 1970s also belonged to the Cincinnati Reds, a team so dominant they were called the Big Red Machine. Led by Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, and Tony Perez, the Reds won back-to-back World Series in 1975 and 1976. They played aggressive, exciting baseball, stealing bases, hitting for power, playing flawless defense. Johnny Bench revolutionized the catcher position, hitting for power and throwing out base runners with cannon-like accuracy. Joe Morgan, a small second baseman, won consecutive Most Valuable Player awards in 1975 and 1976, combining speed, power, and defensive excellence in ways few players ever have. Pete Rose, the heart of the Big Red Machine, embodied a particular kind of baseball passion. They called him Charlie Hustle because he ran to first base on walks, dove headfirst into bases, played with intensity that seemed to come from an earlier era. In 1978, Rose chased another record, Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak from 1941. Rose's streak reached 44 games before ending, falling short but thrilling the nation with his relentless pursuit. Rose would later become one of baseball's most complicated figures. In 1985, he broke Ty Cobb's record for career hits, collecting his 4,256 hit, the most in baseball history. But in 1989, an investigation revealed that Rose had bet on baseball games, including games involving his own team while he was managing the Cincinnati Reds. Betting on baseball was the game's cardinal sin, the one unforgivable act, and Rose was banned from baseball for life. He would never be eligible for the Hall of Fame. Despite his records and achievements, a fall from grace that remains one of baseball's great tragedies. The late 1970s saw the rise of the New York Yankees once again. After years of decline, the Yankees returned to dominance, winning back-to-back World Series in 1977 and 1978. These teams were led by Reggie Jackson, who called himself the straw that stirs the drink, a slugger who thrived in pressure situations. In Game 6 of the 1977 World Series, Jackson hit 3 home runs on 3 consecutive pitches from 3 different pitchers, a performance so dominant they called him Mr. October from that day forward. The 1970s also brought us the beginnings of modern analytics, though few recognized it at the time. Bill James, a night security guard at a Kansas bean factory, began publishing his baseball abstract, filled with new statistics and ways of understanding the game that challenged conventional wisdom. His work was largely ignored by teams and the mainstream media, but he was planting seeds that would eventually grow into the revolution that would transform baseball in the 21st century. As you drift deeper now, let your mind rest on these images. Hank Aaron rounding the bases after home run 715, the weight of history and hatred finally lifted from his shoulders. The Big Red Machine in their crisp white uniforms with red trim, executing baseball with machine-like precision. Let these stories wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you softly, peacefully, into the quiet depths of sleep. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 7, 60 to 70 minutes. Let yourself sink deeper now into the 1980s, a decade when baseball experienced both triumph and scandal, when new stars emerged and old curses seemed unbreakable, when the game reflected the changing mood of America itself. The 1980s began with a strike that interrupted the 1981 season, canceling over 700 games as players and owners fought over compensation for free agents. Baseball had become big business, and the tension between the romance of the game and the reality of money would only grow stronger in the years to come. When play resumed, the season was split into two halves, creating a confusing playoff structure that satisfied no one, though it did give us memorable moments. The decade belonged, in many ways, to Rickey Henderson. The Oakland Athletics outfielder was the greatest leadoff hitter and base stealer baseball had ever seen. In 1982, Henderson stole 130 bases, breaking Lou Brock's single-season record of 118. Henderson ran with a combination of speed, timing, and audacity that made him unstoppable. He would crouch low in his stance, study the pitcher with intense focus, then explode toward first base the moment the ball was hit. On the bases, he was a constant threat, forcing pitchers to alter their approach, distracting them, creating opportunities for his teammates. By the time he retired, Henderson will hold the career record with 1,406 stolen bases, a mark that seems untouchable. In 1985, Pete Rose collected his 4,256 career hit, breaking Ty Cobb's record that had stood since 1928. Rose singled to left field off San Diego Padres pitcher Eric Show, and the game stopped for a celebration. Rose stood on first base, pointing to the sky, tears in his eyes, having accomplished what once seemed impossible. The hit record was now his, though the glory would later be tarnished by his gambling scandal. The mid-1980s also gave us one of baseball's most dramatic moments. On October 25, 1986, the Boston Red Sox were one strike away from winning their first World Series since 1918, leading the New York Mets 5-3 in the 10th inning of Game 6. The curse that had supposedly haunted them since they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees seemed ready to end. But then the impossible happened. The Mets rallied. With 2 outs and 2 strikes, first Gary Carter singled, then Kevin Mitchell singled, then Ray Knight singled. The score was now 5-4. Mookie Wilson came to bat and hit a slow ground ball to first base. Bill Buckner, the Red Sox first baseman, bent down to field it, but the ball rolled between his legs and into right field. Knight scored from second, and the Mets had won the game. 2 days later, they won Game 7 and the World Series. Buckner, a fine player who had collected over 2,700 hits in his career, would forever be remembered for that one error, one moment when the ball didn't bounce the right way. The late 1980s saw the rise of another legendary manager, Tony La Russa, who pioneered the use of specialized relief pitchers. La Russa, who managed the Oakland Athletics, developed a modern closer role, using Dennis Eckersley exclusively in the 9th inning to finish games. Eckersley, a former starter who had struggled with alcoholism before getting sober, became dominant in this role, saving 45 games in 1988 and winning both the Cy Young Award and Most Valuable Player award that year. The concept of the closer, a pitcher who came in only for the final inning with a lead, would become standard practice across baseball. The decade also brought us Kirk Gibson's legendary home run. In Game 1 of the 1988 World Series, the Los Angeles Dodgers faced the powerful Oakland Athletics. Gibson, the Dodgers' best hitter, had injured both legs and wasn't expected to play. But in the 9th inning, with the Dodgers trailing 4-3 and a runner on base, Gibson limped to the plate as a pinch hitter against Eckersley, the game's most dominant closer. Gibson could barely walk, could barely swing. On a 3-2 count, Eckersley threw a backdoor slider, and Gibson, wincing with pain, somehow reached out and drove the ball into the right field seats. As he limped around the bases, pumping his fist, it became one of the most iconic moments in World Series history. The Dodgers would go on to win the series in 5 games. But the 1980s weren't just about moments of glory. They also introduced the specter of performance-enhancing drugs. In 1985, several players testified before a grand jury about cocaine use in baseball, revealing a drug problem that had infiltrated the sport. While cocaine was a focus then, whispers about steroids and other performance enhancers were beginning. Quiet rumors that would explode into scandal in the decades to come. The decade closed with 2 expansion teams announced for 1993, the Colorado Rockies and the Florida Marlins. Baseball continued to grow, reaching into new markets, though some worried that expansion was diluting the talent pool, that there weren't enough quality players to fill all the roster spots. Cal Ripken Jr., the Baltimore Orioles, was also building towards something remarkable during this decade. Since May 30th, 1982, Ripken had played in every single Orioles game, following the footsteps of Lou Gehrig. Game after game, season after season, the tall shortstop showed up and played with skill and determination. By the end of the 1980s, his consecutive game streak had surpassed 1,000 games, and people were beginning to wonder if he might challenge Gehrig's seemingly unbreakable record of 2,130 consecutive games. Rest now in the glow of these memories. Henderson stealing third with the confidence of a man who knew he couldn't be stopped, Gibson limping around the bases with tears of pain and joy, Ripken arriving at the ballpark day after day after day with the reliability of sunrise. Let these images blur and soften as sleep takes you deeper, the decade fading like an old photograph, beautiful and slightly distant, preserved forever in the amber of memory. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 8, 70 to 80 minutes. Breathe slowly and deeply as we enter the 1990s, a decade that began with nostalgia and celebration, reached heights of joy and depths of despair, and ended with questions that will haunt baseball into the new century. The decade opened with new ballparks that looked to the past while embracing the future. On April 6, 1992, Oriole Park at Camden Yards opened in Baltimore, and everything changed. Unlike the sterile cookie-cutter stadiums of the 1960s and 70s, Camden Yards was built with exposed steel, natural grass, and asymmetrical dimensions that recalled the classic ballparks of the early 20th century. It incorporated an old warehouse beyond right field as part of its charm. The park was an instant success, beautiful and intimate, proving that fans crave authenticity and character. Camden Yards sparked a revolution. Suddenly, every city wanted a retro ballpark, and a new golden age of stadium construction began. But the decade's most celebrated moment belonged to Cal Ripken Jr. on September 6, 1995, at Camden Yards. Ripken played in his 2,131st consecutive game, breaking Lou Gehrig's record that had stood for 56 years. When the game became official in the fifth inning, the numbers on the warehouse changed from 2,130 to 2,131, and the crowd of 46,000 stood and cheered for over 22 minutes. Ripken took a lap around the field, shaking hands with fans, visibly emotional. He had done something that seemed impossible in the modern era of baseball. He had played every single day for 13 years without missing a game. Ripken would continue the streak to 2,632 games before voluntarily ending it in 1998, a record of durability and dedication that may never be approached again. The mid-1990s saw baseball reach new offensive heights. Home runs were flying out of ballparks at unprecedented rates. In 1998, the sport was captivated by a home run chase that felt like a national celebration. Mark McGwire of the St. Louis Cardinals and Sammy Sosa's Chicago Cubs were both pursuing Roger Maris's single-season home run record of 61, set back in 1961. The race was friendly, joyful. McGwire and Sosa genuinely seemed to root for each other even as they competed. On September 8, 1998, McGwire hit his 62nd home run, breaking Maris's record. He finished the season with 70 home runs, a number that seemed almost superhuman. Sosa hit 66 that same year, also surpassing Maris. 3 years later, in 2001, Barry Bonds of the San Francisco Giants took the record even further, hitting 73 home runs in a single season. Bonds, already one of the game's greatest players, was having a season unlike anything baseball had ever witnessed. He walked 177 times because pitchers were terrified to throw him strikes, yet still managed to hit 73 home runs, a mark that stands today. But there was a shadow over these accomplishments. Whispers about steroids and performance-enhancing drugs grew louder. McGwire's locker had been found to contain androstenedione, a steroid precursor that was legal at the time but raised questions. Bonds' body had noticeably changed, becoming more muscular than in his earlier years. Sosa would later be suspected as well. The home run explosion of the late 1990s and early 2000s, which had saved baseball's popularity after a devastating strike, was now tainted by suspicion. The steroid era, as it came to be called, had inflated statistics and put asterisks in people's minds next to some of the game's most impressive records. The devastating strike of 1994 had nearly destroyed baseball. On August 12, 1994, players walked out in a dispute over salary caps. The rest of the season was canceled, including the playoffs and World Series. The first time since 1904 that no World Series was played. The strike stretched into 1995, and when the season finally began, many fans were bitter and disillusioned. Attendance dropped. The love affair between America and baseball seemed broken. It was a home run chase of 1998 that brought fans back, even if we now know that Chase was compromised by drugs. The 1990s also gave us the dominance of the Atlanta Braves. From 1991 to 2005, the Braves won their division 14 consecutive times, a streak of sustained excellence unprecedented in modern baseball. Their success was built on remarkable pitching. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz formed one of the greatest starting rotations ever assembled. Maddux won 4 consecutive Cy Young Awards from 1992 to 1995, mastering the art of pitching with control and intelligence rather than pure power. Yet despite winning division after division, the Braves won only one World Series during this run, in 1995. A reminder that regular season success doesn't always translate to October glory. The decade also saw the rise of the New York Yankees dynasty once again. After years without a championship, the Yankees won the World Series in 1996, then again in 1998, 1999, and 2000, 4 championships in 5 years under manager Joe Torre. These teams featured Derek Jeter, a smooth-fielding shortstop who became the face of the franchise, along with Mariano Rivera, a relief pitcher from Panama, who revolutionized the closer role with his legendary cut fastball. Rivera would save 652 games in his career, the most in baseball history, and his entrance to the mound accompanied by Metallica's Enter Sandman became one of sports' most intimidating moments. In 1997, Major League Baseball did something it hadn't done in decades. It formally recognized the importance of Jackie Robinson's achievement by retiring his number 42 across all teams. No player would ever wear number 42 again, except on April 15th each year, Jackie Robinson Day, when every player in baseball wears 42 in his honor. As the decade closed, baseball was popular again, but haunted by questions about the authenticity of its records, about whether the game had lost its way in pursuit of spectacle and profit. The turn of the millennium was approaching, and baseball, like America itself, was unsure of what the future would bring. Let yourself drift now, peaceful and calm, through images of Ripken running his victory lap, of McGwire pointing to the sky after home run 62, of Mariano Rivera walking in from the bullpen as the crowd roared. The 1990s were complicated, full of joy and doubt in equal measure, but the game endured, as it always had, as it always would. Rest now, gently, as the century draws to a close and a new one prepares to dawn. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 9, 80 to 90 minutes. Let your mind drift gently now into the new millennium, into the 2000s and 2010s, when baseball confronted its demons, embraced new ways of thinking, and witnessed curses broken after generations of heartbreak. The 2000s began with baseball still riding the wave of the home run era, but the joy was increasingly mixed with suspicion. In 2003, federal agents raided Balco, a laboratory in California that had been distributing performance-enhancing drugs to athletes, including baseball players. The scandal widened, names were leaked, and suddenly the steroid problem could no longer be ignored. Commissioner Bud Selig was forced to implement stricter drug testing policies. And in 2005, Major League Baseball finally adopted a comprehensive testing program with real penalties for violations. In 2007, former Senator George Mitchell released his report on steroids in baseball, naming 89 players who were alleged to have used performance-enhancing drugs. The Mitchell report was devastating, confirming what many had suspected, that steroid use had been widespread throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Some of the game's biggest stars were implicated, their accomplishments forever questioned. Roger Clemens, a 7-time Cy Young Award winner, was named in the report and spent years denying the allegations. Barry Bonds was prosecuted for perjury related to his testimony about steroid use. Baseball statistics, its sacred numbers, had been compromised. But even as baseball dealt with the scandal, it was undergoing a quieter revolution in how teams thought about the game itself. In 2003, Michael Lewis published Moneyball, a book about Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics' use of statistical analysis to compete with wealthier teams. Beane and his analysts had discovered that traditional baseball wisdom was often wrong, that on-base percentage mattered more than batting average, that stolen bases were overrated, that many expensive players were actually not as valuable as their reputation suggested. The book sparked a revolution. Teams began hiring statisticians and analysts. The old scouts who evaluated players by instinct and experience found themselves competing with young people armed with laptops and spreadsheets. The game was being reimagined through mathematics and probability, an approach that would come to be called sabermetrics after SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. The 2000s also gave us the breaking of baseball's most famous curse. The Boston Red Sox hadn't won a World Series since 1918. 86 years of futility blamed on the curse of the Bambino for selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees. But in 2004, something miraculous happened. The Red Sox faced the Yankees in the American League Championship Series and fell behind 3-0. No team had ever come back from such a deficit in a best-of-7 series. But the Red Sox won Game 4 in extra innings, then Game 5, then Game 6, then Game 7, completing the greatest comeback in baseball history. They went on to sweep the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. The curse was broken, and Boston celebrated like never before. Just 1 year later, in 2005, the Chicago White Sox won their first World Series since 1917, ending an 88-year drought. And then came 2016, when the Chicago Cubs, who had won a World Series since 1908, 108 years of waiting, the longest championship drought in American sports history, finally broke through. The Cubs defeated the Cleveland Indians in 7 games, winning Game 7 in extra innings in one of the most thrilling World Series ever played. When the final out was recorded, Cubs fans wept openly, thinking of grandparents and great-grandparents who had lived and died without seeing this moment. The curse of the Billy Goat, the curse of Steve Bartman, all the accumulated heartbreak of a century, all vanished in that moment of pure joy. The 2010s saw the rise of analytics becoming mainstream. Teams shifted their defensive alignments based on statistical probabilities of where batters would hit the ball. The shift became common. Fielders positioned in unusual places, sometimes with 3 players on one side of the infield. Launch angle and exit velocity became as important as batting average. Pitchers began to be used in shorter bursts, with bullpens becoming deeper and more specialized. The complete game, once the mark of a great starting pitcher, became increasingly rare. Pitchers were now removed after 100 pitches, or at the first sign of trouble, replaced by a parade of relievers. In 2016, another scandal emerged. The Houston Astros were discovered to have used video cameras and a complex sign-stealing system to decode opposing catchers' signals in real time, relaying the information to batters during games. This occurred during their 2017 World Series championship season and beyond. When the scheme was revealed in 2019, the baseball world was outraged. The Astros manager and general manager were suspended and then fired. Players were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony, which angered many who felt they should have been punished as well. The scandal tainted the Astros championship and reminded everyone that even in the modern era, with all its technology and oversight, cheating remained a temptation. The late 2010s also saw the rise of Shohei Ohtani, a Japanese player who did something baseball hadn't seen since Babe Ruth. He both pitched and hit at an elite level. Ohtani joined the Los Angeles Angels in 2018 and immediately captivated baseball with his unique two-way ability. He could throw 100 miles per hour fastballs and hit 450-foot home runs. In 2021, he had one of the most remarkable seasons in baseball history, hitting 46 home runs while also pitching 130 innings with a 3.18 ERA. He won the American League MVP award unanimously, a player unlike any other in the modern game. The 2010s closed another statistical milestone. In 2019, the Major League saw a record 6,776 home runs hit, shattering the previous record. Some attributed this to the ball itself, suggesting it had been altered to fly farther. Others pointed to the launch angle revolution, with players consciously trying to hit the ball in the air rather than on the ground. Whatever the cause, baseball had become a game of three outcomes: strikeouts, walks, and home runs. The ball-in-play action that had once defined the sport was becoming less common, and some worried that baseball was losing something essential in its pursuit of efficiency. Rest now, peacefully, as you picture Ohtani on the mound, then at the plate, define the specialization that had defined modern baseball. Picture Cubs fans flooding into the streets of Chicago, tears streaming down their faces, a century of pain finally released. Let these images fade softly as sleep deepens, the game continuing to evolve, to change, yet somehow remaining recognizable. Still baseball, still beautiful. Baseball Sleep Story, Segment 10, 90 to 100 minutes. Let yourself sink into the deepest rest now as we arrive at baseball's most recent years, the 2020s, a decade still unfolding, still writing its story, filled with challenges and resilience, change and continuity. The decade began with an event unlike anything baseball had ever faced. In March 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the world, Major League Baseball shut down. Spring training was suspended. Opening day was postponed indefinitely, and for months, ballparks sat empty and silent. When the season finally began in late July, it was shortened to just 60 games, and no fans were allowed in the stadiums. Players hit home runs to the sound of silence, celebrated victories in empty cathedrals. Cardboard cutouts filled some seats. Crowd noise was piped in artificially. It was surreal, heartbreaking, a reminder of how much baseball meant when it was suddenly taken away. The pandemic season of 2020 also introduced new rules designed to speed up games and create more action. Extra innings now began with a runner automatically placed on second base, a rule that traditionalists hated but that created more immediate drama. The universal designated hitter was adopted temporarily in both leagues and in the National League's long tradition of pitchers batting. Some of these changes will become permanent, reshaping the game in subtle but significant ways. When fans finally returned to ballparks in 2021, there was a sense of joy and gratitude, a recognition that the simple act of watching a baseball game in person was a privilege that shouldn't be taken for granted. Baseball had endured the pandemic, as it had endured 2 world wars, the Great Depression, strikes, and scandals. The game was resilient, adaptable, eternal. The early 2020s also saw the sport continue to grapple with the pace of play and the style of the game. In 2023, Major League Baseball implemented a pitch clock, limiting the time between pitches to 15 seconds with no runners on base and 20 seconds with runners on. Pitchers and batters had to work faster. The change was dramatic. Games that had been averaging over 3 hours suddenly dropped to around 2.5 hours. Some fans loved the quicker pace. Others felt rushed, believing that baseball's timelessness was part of its charm, that it was the only sport not governed by a clock, and that this made it special. The 2023 season also brought larger bases, increasing their size from 15 inches square to 18 inches square, a seemingly small change designed to reduce injuries and encourage more stolen bases. Baseball was constantly tinkering, trying to find a perfect balance between tradition and innovation, between the game's pastoral roots and the modern audience's expectations. Shohei Ohtani continued to amaze, and in 2024 he signed the largest contract in sports history, a 10-year deal worth $700 million with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The contract was structured unusually, with Ohtani deferring $680 million to be paid after the contract ended, allowing the Dodgers to remain competitive while still securing baseball's greatest talent. Ohtani represented baseball's global reach, a Japanese superstar becoming the face of an American sport, evidence that baseball had truly become international. The modern game has also seen an increasing emphasis on player health and the science of performance. Teams employ full staffs of biomechanists, nutritionists, sleep specialists, and mental skills coaches. Every pitch is tracked by high-speed cameras, every movement analyzed for efficiency and injury risk. Tommy John surgery, which reconstructs the ulnar collateral ligament in the elbow, has become almost routine for pitchers, though its very necessity speaks to how hard modern pitchers throw and how much stress they place on their arms. The average fastball velocity has climbed from the high 80s in the 1980s to the mid-90s today, with many pitchers regularly touching 100 miles per hour. Baseball has also confronted its complicated history and worked toward a more inclusive future. In 2020, amid nationwide protests over racial injustice, MLB strengthened its relationships with historically black colleges and universities and increased funding for youth baseball programs in underserved communities. The Negro Leagues were officially recognized as major leagues in 2020, meaning the statistics and records of players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige would finally be integrated into baseball's official history, correcting a long overdue injustice. Women's participation in baseball has also grown, with more girls playing youth baseball and some making news by playing in men's college programs. While no woman has yet played in the major leagues, the barriers that once seemed absolute are slowly being challenged. Baseball is evolving to reflect a changing society, becoming more diverse and inclusive while honoring its long and complicated past. As we reach the end of our journey through baseball's history, consider how far we've traveled. From Cartwright's 20 rules in 1845 to pitch clocks and biomechanics in 2024, from segregated leagues to international superstars, from games played in cow pastures to games broadcast globally in high definition. Through all these changes, something essential remains unchanged. The diamond is still 90 feet on each side. 3 strikes still retire a batter, and the crack of the bat on a summer evening still sounds exactly as it did 150 years ago. Baseball is a thread connecting generations, a conversation between the past and present. The child who watched Willie Mays is now the grandparent taking the grandchild to see modern stars. The game your great-great-grandparents watched is recognizably the same game you can watch today, and that continuity, that sense of being part of something larger than yourself, larger than any one moment or era, is perhaps baseball's greatest gift. As you drift now into the deepest sleep, let these stories settle gently in your mind like snow falling on an empty ballpark in winter. Picture all the players who ever stepped between those white lines, the legends and the journeymen, the heroes and the heartbreakers, all of them connected by love of this beautiful, imperfect, enduring game. Rest now peacefully, completely, knowing that when spring comes, as it always does, baseball will return and the story will continue, unfolding inning by inning, season by season, forever and ever, amen. Sleep well, star the ego, feed the soul,